Nate was a man who couldn't feel pain, yet every fight left his body broken in ways he couldn't even sense. When a ruthless gang of thugs kidnapped the woman he loved, he turned the very curse that made him different into a weapon. But before the chaos and bloodshed that would soon define his life, Nate's day began like any other, quiet, simple, and uneventful. He blended his usual breakfast smoothie, buttoned his shirt, and headed to his job at the bank, unaware that this would be the day everything changed. During a dull morning meeting, as the manager droned on about quarterly numbers, a young intern named Sherry walked in, instantly lighting up the room, and unknowingly, Nate's world. He was a kind-hearted man, the type who went out of his way to help others, like Earl, the aging client he promised a loan extension so he wouldn't lose his home. While Nate usually stuck to iced coffee, Sherry's sudden presence made him fumble, spilling boiling water on his hand. Yet, to her horror, he didn't even flinch. The skin was blistering, but Nate brushed it off as if nothing had happened. Panicked but intrigued, Sherry invited him to lunch to make up for it. At first, Nate refused. Work, habits, and loneliness had made him cautious. But then he realized it might be the change he needed. They met at a small cafe, and while she enjoyed a slice of cherry pie, he declined, admitting something deeply personal. He couldn't feel pain or temperature, not from heat, not from cold, not from anything. He lived on blended food to avoid injuring himself while eating. "If I stepped on a nail," he said, "I wouldn't even notice until my shoe filled with blood." Sherry was both amazed and unsettled, but when she offered him a bite of her pie, Nate hesitated, then took a small taste. It was simple, but to him, it felt like the start of something human. Nate's only real friend was Roscoe, a guy he knew from online gaming who teased him about being in love. "What do you have to lose?" Roscoe would say, urging him to go on a real date. When Nate finally met Sherry again, their moment was interrupted by an old classmate who recognized him instantly. "Novacaine," he sneered, the same nickname kids used when they beat him up years ago because he couldn't feel pain. Before the awkwardness grew worse, Nate's watch buzzed. It went off every few hours to remind him to use the bathroom, because if he didn't, his bladder might literally burst. When he came back, Sherry was already chatting with the classmate, joking about old times. She suggested they all have a drink to lighten the mood. Nate took a shot effortlessly, while his old bully choked on the same spicy liquor. Sherry laughed it off, but later that night she chose to go home with Nate, the man who couldn't feel pain. At her place, she noticed the tattoos covering his body and admired them, asking where he got them done and if he could still enjoy himself despite his condition. Nate smiled faintly. The answer was yes. That night, he felt something, not physically, but emotionally, for the first time in a long while. The next day at work, he couldn't stop glancing at Sherry, planning how to ask her out again. But before he could, his life was ripped apart. A group of men dressed as Santa Clauses stormed the bank, shouting orders and waving guns. They forced everyone to the ground, demanding the vault combination. The police alarm went off, 3 minutes before officers would arrive. Their leader beat the bank manager mercilessly until his fake beard fell off, then turned his rage on Nate. The blows did nothing. Nate didn't react, didn't scream, didn't flinch, and that only infuriated the robbers. When the gang noticed Sherry watching him, the leader grabbed her, threatening to kill her unless Nate opened the vault. Desperate, Nate finally gave up the code, but the Santas knocked him unconscious and fled, dragging Sherry away as their hostage. When he came to, Nate realized the woman he cared for was gone. Without hesitation, he helped a wounded cop, grabbed the officer's gun, and stole a patrol car to chase the kidnappers. The gang split into 2 cars, but Nate caught up to one and cornered it in a dead end. A brutal fight broke out. One of the robbers, Ben, was relentless. He overpowered Nate easily until the banker used the environment to his advantage, deflecting a shot with a frying pan and plunging his hand into boiling oil to retrieve a gun, his flesh sizzling as he shot the robber dead. His hand was destroyed, but he didn't feel a thing. He snapped a photo of Ben's tattoo before escaping. Roscoe traced the tattoo back to a local parlor. Meanwhile, The police began suspecting Nate of being an accomplice, since he had opened the vault and fled the scene. Desperate and in pain he couldn't even sense, Nate went to Earl for help. The old man pulled a bullet from Nate's hand with pliers and sealed the wound with superglue, while Nate nearly fainted from exhaustion. Before leaving, he gave Earl stacks of stolen cash so he could finally pay off his loan. Then, armed with an address tattooed on his own arm, Nate hunted down the men responsible. At the robbers' hideout, chaos was brewing. Simon, the leader, argued with Sherry, revealing that she had originally planned to seduce Nate just to get the vault code. But things had gone wrong. She hadn't meant for anyone to die. Furious and paranoid, the criminals began turning on each other. Nate found the tattoo artist who'd inked the gang, a violent man covered in hate symbols. Pretending his injured hand was psoriasis, Nate questioned him, but when the artist pulled a knife, a vicious fight erupted. Nate smashed a mirror, used the shards as makeshift weapons, and finally tortured the man into giving up Ben's address, tattooing it onto his arm as a permanent reminder. When Nate arrived at Ben's house, it was rigged with deadly traps. He tripped a wire and a spiked metal ball slammed into his back, followed by a crossbow bolt through his leg. Any normal man would have screamed in agony, but Nate kept moving, bleeding silently through his shirt. He called Roscoe for help, who promised to reach him in 10 minutes on his Harley. But before he could arrive, Ben's brother Andre showed up. Andre discovered the address tattooed on Nate's arm and realized this was the man who killed his brother. He tied Nate up, torturing him slowly, twisting the arrow in his leg, ripping out fingernails, and preparing to take his eyes, until Roscoe burst in, cracking jokes as he knocked Andre out cold. Just as they tried to leave, another trap triggered. Bricks crashed down, a sledgehammer swung, and in the chaos, Andre woke up and attacked. Roscoe tossed Nate a knife. It pierced his own palm instead, but Nate turned the tables, grabbing the arrow still in his leg and driving it straight through Andre's head. Moments later, police sirens blared outside. Nate fled on Roscoe's Harley, only to realize Roscoe had been arrested and was being used to track him. Meanwhile, Sherry confronted Simon, refusing to run away with him any longer. "You've killed people before, Simon." "I haven't," she cried, but Simon just laughed. When Nate finally burst into the garage, gun drawn, Simon revealed a shocking truth. Sherry was his sister. Nate froze. Sherry insisted her feelings for Nate were real, that she hadn't meant for any of this to happen. But Simon attacked, knocking Nate out cold and nearly crushing his skull with a car before Sherry threw herself between them. A gunshot rang out. The police had arrived and shot Simon. Nate was taken away in an ambulance, battered and unconscious. But Simon wasn't dead. He killed a paramedic, hijacked the ambulance, and fled toward the port with Nate still inside. Sherry and a wounded policewoman followed close behind. Inside, Nate struggled to break free, dislocating his own finger to slip the handcuffs. He grabbed a defibrillator, shocked himself to stay conscious, and then electrocuted Simon mid-fight, sending the ambulance flipping over. Simon survived, grabbing a scalpel and strangling Nate until Sherry arrived. She shot him, but Simon recovered, beat her down, and nearly killed her, until Nate, with a jagged bone jutting from his broken arm, rammed it into Simon's skull, ending it for good. Weeks later, Nate woke in the hospital. He'd suffered heart failure, brain hemorrhage, and countless broken bones. The court was lenient, 6 months of house arrest for the man who had risked everything to save a cop and stop a murderer. Sherry, however, wasn't as lucky. She was sentenced to prison. Nate promised to wait for her, no matter how long it took. Now, healed and changed, he finally eats pie without fear. And that's the incredible story of Nate, the man who couldn't feel pain, who turned his curse into a weapon and proved that even a broken body can hold an unbreakable will. If you enjoyed this wild ride, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more brutal and brilliant stories like this.